Screen-wide clearing is an understatement for this build. Perhaps if the screen was the size of Jupiter, your fat belly, or Fubgun's ego, then that statement might be correct. It's the Sundercoom Slayer, and the build is back stronger than ever. It's been getting buffed league after league, and now finally we're able to properly scale both its attack speed and AoE, making it an absolute beast when it comes to mapping. And not only that, I've also made it extremely tanky, easy to gear, fast, and a fantastic boss killer. Alright, so how does this fantastic build function then? Well, it's simple. Sunder itself already has great AoE, but we're going to pair this with stacking even more area of effect. This allows us to cover the whole screen in fissures. And these fissures are just as painful as those in your butthole, with the difference of these being painful for your enemies instead. We scale these fissures in several ways. First, we use branching fissures. This effectively gives your Sunder aimbot, allowing fissures to sneak around corners and angles. We also scale the number of fissures through both our gear and passive tree. This has an additional benefit. It double dips by scaling all of our fissure-based skills. That's because we're also using Earth Shatter and Forge Hammer on bosses, both of which scale through fissures. When combined, this more or less allows us to one-shot any boss in the game. But that's still not enough for our gazillion screens of clear, because as you can see, there's some kind of white substance covering the screen as well, and if you wipe that off, you'll notice another white substance, and that's Herald of Ice chaining. This is currently the best way in the game to wipe entire screens of enemies, so enjoy it before GGG nukes it. It works by combining Herald of Ice with Armor Break and Armor Explosion. Heralds can't trigger other heralds, but Armor Explosion is not a herald's skill. So when slotted into Herald of Ice, it can chill enemies, allowing Herald of Ice to trigger, which then triggers Armor Explosion, repeating the chain. This does, however, require one of two things. Either you splurge a couple of hundred divines on support gems and jewels, or you go the cheap route, like I did, and grab one gain as extra physical roll. Since this is just a perfect essence, it also means we can easily craft a cheap, godlike mace to get the build online quickly. That's exactly what I've done here, and in my previous build version, which you can get running for about 1 divine worth of gear, making the build viable for everyone. So what else do you need to know before playing the build? Let's check it out, starting with the gear. There are 3 mandatory item rolls / gear pieces. The first is Polchiaculm. This allows chilled enemies to be instantly shattered. This is important because the armor explosions socketed into our Herald of Ice won't deal enough cold damage on its own to freeze enemies. However, it can deal enough cold damage to chill them, which is enough to trigger Herald of Ice as long as we're wearing Polchiaculm. This ring is also cheap as fuck, and I highly recommend buying a bunch and corrupting them for either item rarity or increased damage. It's an easy way to get an extra useful implicit. The second most important thing is getting the gain as extra physical damage roll we talked about. It's a perfect essence mod, and I'll have a crafting guide linked showing how to make the exact weapon I'm using. You can make a better one with extra attack speed, but that requires fracturing a mod and desecrating the rest, which costs extra divines. The easiest route is crafting something similar to this. The third priority is getting a life leech roll. I'm a lazy moron and don't have one, which forces me to socket life leech into my Sunder, not recommended. That said, you'll deal so much damage that it honestly doesn't fucking matter. For the rest of the gear, here's what we're looking for. First, we stack a shit ton of strength because we want to use Giant's Blood. This allows us to use a 2-hander and a shield, which is what actually lets us survive. Combined with some additional block chance, we become nearly immortal, especially if you swap offensive ascendancy nodes for extra armor and max life. Once strength is sorted, prioritize max life, then cap your resistances, and then stack as much armor as possible. The most important armor sources are your body armor, since it scales via the passive tree, and your shield, as shield armor also provides damage. Prioritize armor on those pieces, and fix stats and resists on everything else. After that, you can start looking at armor applies to elemental damage, item rarity, and your main damage multipliers. These include melee ranks on your amulet and gloves, flat damage, and, if you can afford it, attack speed on gloves. That's your lowest priority. Before moving on to gems, here are a few tips. First, you can save a buttload of currency by not getting spirit on your amulet. Instead, weapon swap for bossing and set your persistent buffs accordingly. Second, if you can't solve your strength requirements, do what I did and use a soul core of Cholotl. Combine that with all attributes on gear and your requirements are easily solved, especially since you already need some dex and int for heralds. Finally, spend your currency on your bossing weapon, not your mapping weapon. Crafting a mapping weapon is easy, but for bossing, we want as much damage as possible. Often, buying one outright is cheaper than crafting. Great job, friends! Gear complete. Let's move on to gems. First up, we have Earth Shatter. This is what we use on bosses and tougher rares. You simply spawn the spikes, shout to explode them, and repeat. While mapping, one Earth Shatter followed by an Infernal Cry is usually more than enough before moving on. On bosses, it's generally 2 Earth Shatters, then a Cry, and repeat. This works because you can have a total of 6 fissures active at once, and with branching fissures we gain 2 additional ones. Another option is using Chaom's Madness. In that case, you'd only ever use 1 Earth Shatter at a time, but attack slower. Use whichever feels better to you. Next, we have Armor Break 3, which quickly breaks enemy armor, giving us 20% increased physical damage taken, along with 40% armor from scavenged plating. The remaining support gems are pure damage: Heft, Heavy Swing, and Concentrated Area. When it comes to war cries, we generally use Infernal Cry first whenever it's off cooldown. After that, we spam Seismic Cry since we can bypass its cooldown. But before that, let's go through the setup. For Raging Cry, we use it for rage generation. We link it with Tireless for extra empowers and Second Wind for additional uses and cooldown recovery. For Seismic Cry, we start with the same setup, but for the final support, we use Enraged War Cry. This allows us to spam it indefinitely, since Raging Cry generates 20 rage, and Enraged War Cry only consumes 15 rage to remove the cooldown. Next up are the Heralds. We use Herald of Ash mainly because Herald of Ice isn't reliable in Delirium and Simulacrum. If you want more damage instead, you can swap it for Berserk. Herald of Ash also looks cool, which is reason enough for me to use it. We scale it with Magnified Area and Fire Mastery. Now for Herald of Ice, which is where the real screen clearing happens. We trigger chaining by using Armor Break. This allows Herald of Ice to break armor, which then triggers Armor Explosion. We make this easier by using Uruk's Smelting, and then ensure that Armor Explosion actually chills enemies by using Cold Attunement. Finally, we add Magnified Area for even more AoE. The reason we need Gain as extra physical is because without it, Herald of Ice would deal no physical damage at all. I have this modifier both on my weapon and as my anoint via Dangerous Blossom, ensuring we reliably apply Armor Break. For bossing, and for mechanics like Ritual, we drop down Forge Hammer and explode it using our War Cries to create Molten Fissures. Every time we then hit enemies with Slam skills, it triggers Molten Fissures for an absurd amount of damage. We scale Forge Hammer with Elemental Armament, Concentrated Area, Fist of War, and Ambrosia. Ambrosia lets us easily shock bosses and gain a large chunk of lightning damage. To maximize this, You'll want a mana flask with lots of extra charges. Finally, we add fire exposure. Or if you have a Rakiata, you can slot that in here instead. Now let's talk about sunder. I'm using long shot since sunder mainly deals damage at range. Because what's the best way to solve the fact that melee sucks balls? That's right. You don't play melee. I then use aftershock for extra clear, or life leech, like I am right now since I'm missing life leech on my ring, which you absolutely shouldn't be. After that, we add branching fissures, which is fantastic for clear, magnified area for Giga AoE, and finally rapid attacks for some extra attack speed. For the final two skills, we have scavenged plating for 40% armor and overwhelming presence to quickly stun bosses. Since I don't have spirit on my gear, I only run overwhelming presence on weapon set 2. I then turn off one of the heralds in that weapon set and do the opposite for weapon set 1. And just like that, gems complete. At this point, how about dropping a sub? It won't hurt. Let's move on to the passive tree. When it comes to ascendancy points, you have two main options. You can either take Earthbreaker and Ancestral Empowerment for massive clearing power, or Stone Skin and Mysterious Lineage if you're lacking defenses. The one node you always take, though, is Hulking Form. It's probably the best node in the entire game. Second only to extra bag space, of course. Lamau. From there, we move downward and grab extra armor from our chest, some fire damage, and attack speed, because attack speed just makes the game more fun. Keep moving down and pick up AoE, attack speed, and the Rage on Hit node, which is your main way of sustaining rage while mapping. We also grab the cluster with Polished Iron, ensuring we never get stunned, and Blade Catcher, which heavily reduces critical damage taken. This setup is mainly needed for weapon set 1, our mapping set. For weapon set 2, we focus much more on damage. We grab the damage cluster, some strength, accuracy, more damage, and then socket our Against the Darkness jewel. I'm using one with extra cold damage for easy chilling and strength to make gearing easier. The jewel location is great here since it gives us defense, AoE, rage, and max life. All stats we'd want anyway. From there, we move down and grab Brute Strength for a huge damage boost, followed by Giant's Blood. If you can afford another good jewel, you can skip some of these clusters and socket your Darkness jewel further down instead. It's arguably an even better location. I just didn't want to spend a few hundred divines on an extra jewel right now. After that, we move upward to grab a ton of stun buildup and damage for weapon set 2, followed by the shield clusters. The most important one here is Great Defense, which converts shield armor into damage. Finally, we grab extra elemental damage reduction, reduced projectile damage taken, extra fissures, blood magic, letting us spend life instead of mana, and some final damage nodes for weapon set 2, along with a Heart of the Well Diamond. The only real requirement here is max life on kill, and preferably some extra cold damage. I grabbed Chaos damage simply because it was the cheapest. Looking out for my broke friends out there? Alright friends, that's the passive tree done. One last thing remains, how to actually play the build. For mapping, it's simple. You sprint through the map, spam sunder, and try not to get hit. In most cases, that's all you'll ever need. In rare situations, you might use Earth Shatter and explode it with Infernal Cry or Seismic Cry. I'm also a big fan of using Forge Hammer on tanky rares, exploding it, and then spamming Sunder or Earth Shatter on top of it. I do want to add a disclaimer about Earth Shatter while mapping. The skill has been bugged for months. If you use it near terrain, it sometimes just doesn't work. The spikes simply disappear. If you plan to use Earth Shatter for mapping, go post on the forums and tell GGG to pull their massive thumbs out of their asses and fix this shit already, because it's genuinely obnoxious. Anyway, let's talk bossing. Here you follow a simple wombo combo. First, drop a Forge Hammer, then place 2 Earth Shatters. As soon as the boss spawns, you blow everything up with Infernal Cry. Then you use 2 more Earth Shatters and Infernal Cry again. At this point, the boss should either be stunned or very close to it. This is when you swap to Seismic Cry. Use 2 Earth Shatters, then Seismic Cry, and repeat until the boss dies. If your gear is bad, you may need to refresh Forge Hammer once or twice. But if that's the case, your gear is truly trash, because fissures last 8 seconds, and I've yet to see a boss survive that long. Alright friends, that's everything you need to know to play this build. If you have any questions, drop them below, and I'll ignore them as usual. Until next time, have a good one.